Commissioner Susan is going to talk with you in more detail here in just a few minutes about the communication issues, but there were some options that were, there were some communication issues related to options that I wanted to touch on just a minute. The panel felt like we needed to communicate early and often whenever customers had a choice and make sure they understood those choices and the options that were available to them. We just now talked a lot about the issues related to lateral and subordinate pruning, so I won't go back into that anymore. But private pruning is an option. It's always been available to our customers. Any customer who wishes to prune their own tree or trees can certainly do that to any standard or using any method they and their contractor or their professional tree maintenance company wishes to use, provided they achieve the minimum clearance that we've established on our system. So we establish the minimum clearance and they can go and prune it any way they wish with their own private contractor. We've even had some customers who come back and basically negotiate with us, if you will, on the clearance standard, who say, if I agree and I'm willing to prune it every year, do I have to achieve the 10 feet? And so there are some things that we can do if the customer is willing to prune their tree more often and use their own contractor. That's an option available to them and has been in the past. We'll make a greater effort to make sure they understand that's an option going forward if they choose to use it. Tree removal also is an option. Sometimes customers tell us they wish they had known about it. We thought we had been communicating that well. We're going to make an increased effort to communicate that, to let them know that if a tree is immediately under the lines, if it's in very close proximity, and it's going to require a great deal of pruning, it may be the best option to have that tree removed. Even if the customer just doesn't think they're going to like the looks of the tree after it's pruned, we're willing to remove that tree if that's the customer's desire. What we would prefer to do is to avoid pruning it and then removing it afterwards and have to pay the cost of both. But we're going to communicate with the customers, make sure they understand that option, and that that's a choice if they wish to exercise it, that we'll be willing to accommodate them. As far as pre-planting, I mentioned a little bit earlier that we have a pre-planting process. That's where our foresters go out, walk the circuit, look at trees, all the trees that are going to be pruned, basically make out the work order for the contractor so that he'll know what's to be done and how to do it. We do that on about 30% of our system today. The panel recommended that we extend that and do it on 100% of our system. And frankly, that's not going to work for us. We're not going to be able to get to that point. We are, though, going to increase our use of pre-planting. It works best and is most feasible on moderately dense growth and trees in residential neighborhoods. Not all of our system would work well for pre-planting. It's also very costly if you extend it to the entire system. But we are going to increase its use. But I think the important thing to recognize is that in all of our communications with our customers, we give them a name or a phone number that they can call if they have questions or concerns about the pruning that's to occur. Customers who call that number and who request a meeting with our foresters essentially get many, if not most of the benefits of pre-planting by that contact and by that interaction with our foresters. So it's not like those kinds of benefits can't be achieved without having to pre-plan 100% of our system. Another thing, and you'll see the effects of this almost immediately because the planting season begins in November, we're going to increase the size of the trees from the 4 to 5 foot size today to 6 to 7 feet, and that will be effective in the trees we start planting next month. Next year, we're going to offer customers more variety in terms of the types of trees, the species of trees that they can plant. And also, we'll give customers the option of choosing to have that tree planted not in their yard, but in a community area, a public area, if you would like, if they would like. Those specific areas we haven't identified yet, but that'll be a choice that customers can make if they wish to do so. We've talked a little bit already about the overhang removal and limiting that going forward. We've talked about the modification to the clearance standard for low growth trees, and we've talked about lateral subordinate pruning. By implementing those recommendations, many of the benefits that customers have achieved or realized in the past by having special status trees will be awarded or be extended to virtually all trees. But we will still remain or maintain that special status tree program. We will expand it to areas such as public parks and recreation areas, areas that might be aesthetically sensitive or particularly visible to the community and of concern to the community. We'll give special consideration to those areas. We'll expand our list of special status trees in conjunction with customer requests. We'll proactively be looking for trees that we think meet that criteria, and we'll consider other options beyond what I've already talked about to mitigate the impact on pruning in those trees and in those areas. Also, scheduling. We currently schedule by circuit, by and large, and sometimes the circuits that overlap or run through large neighborhoods don't get trimmed at the same time. And sometimes the 69 kV lines and the 13 kV lines, and in some cases maybe sharing some of the same poles, don't get trimmed at the same time. And that results in our going back and having to be in the neighborhood more than might be necessary to trim those circuits on those different cycles. We're going to work hard to match up those cycles and those circuits as much as we can. It won't be possible to get a 100% match simply because of the way our system is laid out, particularly in some of the larger neighborhoods. But we're going to do a better job of planning and scheduling that work and reduce the numbers of times that crews are in neighborhoods doing pruning, which hopefully will be of benefit to everyone involved. As far as some of the things that are more long-term, there's a couple of things there that are going to take a little bit of time. We are going to look at tree growth regulators as the panel recommended that we do so. Those are basically growth retardants. It will take a little bit of time for us to make that application on a test area, and we'll want to evaluate the growth or regrowth of those trees over a cycle of 3 or 4 years. And we'll also want to kind of get a better handle and gauge on our customers in the community on how they feel about us applying growth retardants on their trees. So that's going to take a little bit of time, but we're going to look at that as recommended and see what applicability that may or may not have on our system. The other thing that we're going to do, as recommended by the panel, is to look at what other utilities may be doing with their vegetation management programs, how they may be taking into consideration things such as drought or other environmental conditions, how they're measuring that, how they're monitoring that, how they apply that to their vegetation management programs, and what impact that then has short-term and long-term on those programs. So those two efforts are going to take a little bit of time. We're going to put a lot of effort into all the other things I've just talked about, get that moving as quickly as possible, and then move forward with these as well in the not too distant future. Any other questions on standards or application of what we're doing in the field today?
This is a big picture question. Taking into account the areas you touched on, where there is going to be more room for deviation and alternative approaches, what is the impact on our tree line utility designation of all this? Do we know, or is that even important anymore?
We're willing to accept the consequences of a tree line, whatever they may be. Frankly, based upon their rules and their guidelines and my conversations with them, and I know Liz has had some conversations with representatives as well, we believe that anything other than strict lateral pruning will result in the loss of Tree Line USA status. That's a consequence. We recognize that. We're willing to accept that. I mean, it is what it is. If there are no other questions, I'm going to turn it over to Liz at this point. Liz is our lead forester. She's responsible for overseeing all of the field activities related to our vegetation management program. She's been with us about 3.5 years. She has a forestry degree from the University of Tennessee and a master's degree in range management from Utah State. She is the second vice president of the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council, and she received the President's Award from that group just last year for her contributions to the profession. So I'm going to let her take it from here.
The panel's recommendations related to contractors really focused on 3 main areas that I'll be covering, and the first is training. Although we're reluctant to become too prescriptive in our contractor training requirements, each of our contractors is required to provide a fully trained workforce for work on the KUB system. We know that we'll be able to work with each of our contractors to research training program options and make changes for next year's contracts to ensure that KUB's needs are being met. Of course, part of the training to work on our system is very specific to KUB, so we'll be refreshing that part of the training program to reflect any new program changes. And another concern raised was that we address language issues, perhaps by providing a translator for the KUB portion of the training, or by providing our materials in both English and Spanish. Another area of focus is contractor oversight, ensuring the contractors are doing what they're paid to do in the way KUB wants it done. This recommendation includes both incentives for good performance and penalties for poor performance. And we'll be able to address this recommendation immediately, as we already have in place a contractor performance review process that we've used for vegetation management. However, we'll begin work to evaluate our current process and identify areas for improvement in that area. And lastly, communications. Each of the contract crews working on our system need to understand clearly our expectations for customer contacts, what our policies are, and how we expect them to respond to a customer question or concern in the field. And we'll need to follow up, of course, to ensure they're executing according to those expectations. And last but not least, improved customer service and attitude will be a very important component of our refreshed training program for our contractors. Any questions on contracts?